again, Nexus was bought by a different owner, and that was Dark Horse Comics. We like to say that Mike Richardson came riding up on his Dark Horse and rescued us from the incompetence that never paid us at First Comics. But
Yeah, First Comics actually owned the titles they published, which a lot of people don't know now. And so Dark Horse bought Nexus, and then gave the rights back to you guys, right?
Yeah, in an unprecedented act of generosity, Mike Richardson gave us the rights back to our own characters. Imagine that. It doesn't happen too often, certainly not in the entertainment business, in the movie and otherwise, but we were lucky enough to have that. There is a story, a particular personal story, that I remember vividly around the time that this book was being done. And I had started drawing it, and then I stopped drawing it, because something happened in my life that would change my life forever. It's a girl. I met this nice girl on a hitchhiking trip to Portland, Oregon. And when I met her, life began to change. I even called up Mom and said, "Mom, I met the one." Well, of course, my mom didn't believe me. But eventually she learned to trust my instincts about these things. And I've been with her for 27 years, and that young lady is standing right in the back there, raising her hand. I call her Princess Gino Janelli, among many other things.
I remember you, we were talking on the phone, or maybe in person, because I think I saw you on that trip, and you were like, "Dollface, I met Sandra." And I was like, she's the main female character in the series, and I was like, "You know Sandra's a fictional character, right?" It's like, I knew he knew, but you know, and he knew that I would say that, which is probably why he said that to me.
It's in question what I know about reality sometimes, but that makes for good comic book people, right? Anybody got any questions so far with any of the stuff, any of the cool stuff we've been talking about
I
here?
have a couple of show and tell things.
Okay, let's have Dollface show and tell here a little bit.
So I brought, just because I ran across this stuff recently, I'm going through a big basement purge, and I keep everything. So this is the actual issue of Nexus, The Origin, which was a retelling of the origin story that we did to reboot it at Dark Horse. And these, just because it's fun to see things in person, these are some fun double-sided posters. When was the last time you saw that?
A couple days ago.
Oh, wow. Well, I brought mine with me, and they put these black and white, more funky indie things on the back. But I love that the design that you did is a fantastic design with the composition of the artwork. It manages to work in almost any configuration.
Yeah, that was back when I used myself for a model.
And then talking about the printing technology of the day, I also ran across these. These are actually from some preview pages of Nexus, The Wages of Sin. And this is what our printer's proofs would look like. And this is the 4-color thing I was telling you about. So this was not colored on Blue Line, but it still has to be separated into 4 printer's plates or pieces of film. So that's the black line art. And then this is the other 3 colors all together. And as you peel them away, you can see the density differences and how it all starts to change. And that's the yellow, which is hard to see. And there was one page in one of the series we did at Dark Horse, I can't remember which one, where the printer accidentally swapped 2 of the films or plates. So like everything that was supposed to be magenta was cyan, and everything that was supposed to be cyan was magenta, and it creates this insane effect. I don't remember which series that was now, though.
Thank God I blotted it from my mind.
Yeah, you went past it.
On that cover, it looks like there's no pure black on that cover. I just wanted to confirm that if true. Other than the logo stuff, it looks like you painted that without any pure black.
Well, it's oil paint on canvas, so it wasn't done in the way that Anina was just demonstrating there. But good eye. We should hire half the people in this room here to.
We also had a hell of a time reproducing those paintings from what I remember, because they had to be shot on special large format cameras, so we had to send them out of house. Dark Horse doesn't have that equipment, and this was how I learned that nothing in color looks the same from the original to
Yeah.
the proof that you see to the printed version, and depending on what paper it's printed on, it's drastically different. So there are a couple of these that we had to have them shoot it multiple times because if it was focused just wrong, it would actually pick up the canvas more than the paint, which was, I had never experienced before.
Well, I figure if I make things too easy for people, they get complacent. We really don't want that. You want to see a picture of me and Baron in the 80s? Sure. Of course you do. There's me and Baron in the 80s. Note the hair.
Baron and I had almost the same haircut, apparently.
Yeah, we both had curly haired parents, Baron and I. But that was that was some local feature in a local Madison, Wisconsin magazine that we were part of. Now, I know that it looks like me and Baron are the very picture of happiness and compatibility there, but there's other sides to this kind of stuff. Now, it looks like Baron's winning, but let me assure you, at the end of the fight, he was trounced royally. More 80s pictures, how we love the 80s. The music, the hair, so with this guy right here. Those were good times. You relished in the 80s. Was that before or after the Mohawk, Dollface?
The Mohawk was in the 80s, yes.
Yeah.
I had a black Mohawk in 1983, I think.
And I had hair like that in the 80s, from a really bad haircut. I walked in and told them I wanted a punk haircut, and they shaved my damn head. I love it.
That's pretty punk, man.
Yeah, it is.
When I had my Mohawk, it was a wonderful barber in Oberlin, Ohio, where I was going to school, and she shaved my head with a straight razor. I didn't know she was going to do it. She takes this thing out and starts sharpening it on the straw, and I was like, holy crap. I better not move at all.
Don't move, Dollface. Well, this cover that you were looking at right here, we have a picture of how these things start. And, there was a time when these behind-the-scene features were seldom seen by anyone other than the production people. And but when you look at this cover, I'm going to now show you what it looked like when I handed in the comp, or the rough as I call it. It's pretty rough.
That's not very rough.
Well, I'm glad you think so. It's just kind of indicated. I knew where I wanted to go with these things, and eventually the editors got to trust me.
We also had the logo redesigned for this series. That was a big effort. I think Willie Schubert did it.
He did. So together, that's what they look like in comparison right there. There. There you go.
And how big was the original painting?
The original painting was done on a standard size oil canvas that was 20 by 30. 20 by 30, yeah. That was comic book proportional. So I would end up buying a lot of those size canvases to do all my paintings on. If it was done in oil paint, if it was done in acrylics or a different kind of medium, I would just get out the illustration board back when it was made much better.
You know what? I don't know if I ever asked you this. Why did you choose to go with this unfinished approach at the bottom? Is that thematically related to the origin, or was there some other reason for that?
This is why it's the new Ann Dollface show. She covers things I would never think about. Did you bring my mail? Any messages at all? Okay, latte, whipped, double. Okay, cream. This is called a vignette. When you leave white space in a painting like this, the French word is vignette. Vignette. I pronounce it vignette, like most Americans do. So that's why I happen to do that. When a person begins a comic book, unless you're Jack Kirby and dive right into it because you know exactly where you want to go with it and exactly how it's going to turn out in your head, mortal people have to resort to something called thumbnail sketches. And on the following slide, you will see my version of what my thumbnails look like. The whole book is mapped out like this, and without that, I can't have a sense of cohesion or a sense of the big picture starting at the beginning, going to the middle, and ending in a way that has a unity to it.
There are very few people working in comic books, very few illustrators who have the kind of compositional sense that Steve does. So when you read his work, even if you're going back and rereading it, really stop and look at that, because it's every single panel has a beautiful composition, and then all the panels fit together beautifully, and you were always pushing yourself, you were always trying to try something different and evolve your craft.
That's why this is a good competition. If you want to see, and that looks like it's hard to tell how big the original thumbnail actually was from that. So the next slide is going to show you how big the actual, one of those little squares is. And that's actually oversized. Thumbnails are a way of seeing the whole thing on a single piece of paper. And that's how you can catch all the things that have to take place in a good pace in a well-drawn comic book to make sure the images flow right. Oh, we have some good ones coming up here. Dolphish, you got any comments here?
You don't have any of Baron's old script pages in there, do you?
Unfortunately, I precluded those as not to offend your eyes.
Baron used to, early on, for many years, he wrote all of his scripts by hand with really crude layouts. So he would draw a really sloppy rectangle and then just draw these stick figures and stuff, and then write a bunch of dialogue around it. And then he would, I think, type the dialogue at some point. But then Steve would take that, chicken scratching, and actually make a beautiful comic book page and move panels. Often you would move panels around or change the flow of the.
Yeah, I wish I sure would. I would definitely change that stuff a lot. But that's the way Baron started out doing his stories. Eventually, he stopped doing it that way. Anyone want to guess why he stopped doing it? His tried and true method for decades?
You kept moving them.
What?
You kept moving them.
I kept moving him. That in his lumbago. When he would bend over and draw, he would tense his back so hard that he ended up getting permanent back problems, which last to this day. What do we have coming up here?
Oh, that cover was so hard to reproduce. It never came out right. It's beautiful though.
As the next one will attest here. So whatever you heard Dollface just say, I'm dispelling all that nonsense because this is the way it should have turned out. Before and after. Now I don't know why Dark Horse hits so much trouble for this, but this is one of the great embarrassment moments of my life, which I will of course reveal to everyone here because we're intimate and we're good friends. I had the misfortune of being called over to a local comic shop to sign copies of this issue that just came out. I didn't know that it was going to look this bad right here. But I just thought, what can go wrong when you're a perfectionist? I've covered every base there is, and there's no way it's going to turn out bad. Well, that's when you tend to look out for explosions in the world. To me, this is the World Trade Center of bad comic book cover reproduction right here. And I went over, all happy to sign these books, and I saw that. And let's just say whatever mental health inadequacies that I possess, they all came out at that very singular moment. Do you remember the phone call?
I think I blocked that one. I did not know it was going to come out looking like that, because this was another instance when I think basically the system we had set up for reproducing these things was not adequate, and I didn't have enough experience with reproducing paintings to know of any better options in Portland. And they weren't going to pay to ship it somewhere else to have it scanned, basically. But I didn't know the proofs didn't look like that. They didn't look that bad. And when I lost it when I saw the printed copies. And then I think I hid in my office in terror until you called me.
It confirmed her every fear. It was not a good day.
You changed the logo, too.
Also,
Yeah, we did.
they cropped it differently for previews. It's a different aspect ratio. You must have planned for that in the original to allow, for example, more on the left side than was printed originally.
You're hired.
You don't want me. I'm more of an editor.
Oh, good. I'm glad we had a few extra editors in here. Now, on the good side of things, because there's always a balance in life, right? This was one of the covers that I think you were kind of fond of. This was a back cover for one of the Nexus issues right
Yeah,
here.
and that's one of the things I found in my archives recently,
Yes.
in my basement.
This is another case of before and after that we're going to show you here to keep you entertained. That's the watercolor rock. That was probably done thumbnail size, about that big.
No, it's about 8.5 by 11.
Okay, I stand corrected. Good thing Anina's here. And this is what they both look like. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at a funny version of this on the computer here. That's how the final turned out.
I love this one, especially, there's a lot of things I love about it, but in contrast to the first Nexus cover that you showed, which is a very like, I never really liked that cover because I never liked the pose of like, the girl clinging to the hero. But on this one, she's just standing on top of him and it's a total butt shot and I thought it was hilarious.
This was the era of the butt shot, by the way. And that's them in comparison right there. Yeah, you know, I learned at some point that if you want to have something that arrests people's attention, you've got to come up with a design gimmick. Because if you just have the same old nonsense in comic books where people are flying out of the cover, and you're not going to get any attention like that. It doesn't matter what decade you're in, but that if you resort to that kind of stuff, you're not going to get noticed. So you have to really, this is where all the thinking comes in. You have to think about gimmicks and something that in your head is something people have never seen before. And the more offbeat it is, the more funny it is. People tend to remember those things. Think about the things you remembered growing up that have always stayed in your head. They tend to be things that were done differently than the way everyone else was doing things. And that may be one of the secrets that me and Anina had doing our book here.
Was it issue number 8?
Did you say issue number 8?
I was wondering if it was for issue number 8.
No, it wasn't. This was when we began the Dark Horse run, and it was a series of mini-series, which I think were mini-series prominent by that time, that we started doing this in the early 90s?
They were, I think it was partly because, so that you guys wouldn't have to do you could take breaks in between a little bit and not have to do the ongoing monthly grind, and, you know, because at some point you have to take a break from that anyway. And I hadn't quite yet developed the kind of model that Saga has. If you read Saga, they're doing a long comic book series, and they intentionally take time off in between story arcs. So this was kind of the same way of doing that, but we numbered them, you know, 1 through 4. The other thing about that is that comic book retailers tend to overorder issue number 1 of anything. It's just because of the weird dynamic of the retail system, and so probably someone somewhere at Dark Horse had thought it was a good idea to have a lot of number 1s. But at one point we started numbering them continuously in the indicia because I wanted to maintain your history and your continuity. And so if you look in the indicia, in the little fine print on the inside of these Dark Horse miniseries, they have the consecutive numbering that goes all the way back to the origin of it. Partly because they think you're getting close to issue 100 maybe, and we wanted to make sure that it was in fact issue 100. I don't think we got that far at Dark Horse, I can't remember now.
I can't remember either, and I think we actually surpassed it at some point with different artists contributing to it. But if any of you recall the issues that were taking place back then in the early 90s, we still had letter columns. And those were all answered by our beloved editor, Anina Bennett here. And Anina had a very strong perspective when it came to talking to readers about things. If somebody told Dollface no, she would say yes. Firmly and assertively right back in her face. So if you want to get a laugh and some perspective on how a good editor handles irascible fans, then you just have no further to look than the girl to my left.
Well, now I gotta go back and reread them. I haven't read them for a long time. I loved reading letter columns when I was growing up reading comics, and I loved answering letter columns, and Baron wasn't totally into it, and so I think that was why I wound up doing it for, What It Is was the name of the letter column in Nexus. That was great fun.
I was doing some experimentation back then. How much time do we have, by the way? How many? 20 minutes? Good, we're safe. We have a lot of partying to do here before the music kicks in. One of the experiments I did was based on something that the illustration field used to do back in the early 1920s. And it was on a pebble paper called coquille board. And it was something that nobody was using back then. I had a lot of illustration era heroes back then. And one of them was a guy named Andrew Loomis. And if you've ever seen his books, he published a lot of his drawings in coquille board. Unfortunately, the printing process back then was lacking. And a lot of the coquilles, the little dots that you applied with a Prismacolor or a China marker, a grease pencil, didn't turn out. Now, I couldn't find the original of this. It might have been sold at some point. But that's the way the stuff actually looked when I handed it in, before it might have gotten washed out or whatever. So we learned to make Xerox copies of the original art first, so it was locked into place.
It may have had to do with the scanning, maybe that's why the Xerox, the photocopies work better. Because the scanner probably couldn't cope very well with the different depths of the, I'm getting super technical on this panel, sorry you guys.
No, you're probably right, I couldn't pick up the dots. You couldn't
Higher
pick up the dots.
contrast, probably.
I mean,
This is because this is one of the things editors have to deal with, it's kind of an invisible part of the process, so we get a little obsessive about it sometimes.
well, imagine a publishing company that doesn't know how to pick up dots. I'm just outraged. Now, there was one thing that I had to include here. It was, I believe it was Anina's favorite moment in Nexus. No, there's no nudity, there's no butt shots. It actually came in the form of this girl with, when she got her first flying lessons in her flying suit. This is Sandra right here, the female interest in Nexus, and she was tired of being kind of in the background, even though she never was relegated to any kind of a sidekick role or anything like that. She was always proud of it, but one time she decided that, well, if he can fly, if Nexus can fly, I want to fly too. So the person, the alien presence that gave Nexus his powers of flight, gifted them to Sunny Honey. We call her Sunny Honey. And that was her moment of glory when she got her own special flying suit to go along with her powers of flight.
Has everybody in the audience read Nexus? Are you familiar with the characters? Anybody who has not? Okay, great.
Well,
Because it's an awesome concept, and if there was anybody in here who didn't know the character, I was gonna explain it to you.
yeah, good. Thanks for I overlook that kind of stuff sometimes. Well, as a matter of fact, I am going to offend your eyes, because coming up next is an actual page that Mike Barron gave me. So the previous page you just saw that featured one particular panel, this is what it looked like when Mike Barron handed it to artist Steve Rude. Off to the side are my little readjustments of how I wanted it to look. So I'll let you gaze upon that for just a few more seconds here before something self-destructs. But that's what I grew up working with right there. I got used to it. It was hard at first, but then I didn't want them to stop. That's how that was what I was used to. On occasion, editors and artists, the artist will hand in something and the editor will say, well, I don't think that's quite there yet. And in the case of this next slide, we're looking at that very process there. This is something I sent in to Anina, Dollface, and she said, I don't think it works as a cover. But that's something I handed in there. It's kind of like a generic cover. There was nothing in the book that actually took place like that. Ironically, later on when Anina went off to Denmark to do some work for the starving kids of the world in Africa.
I was editing Disney comics for Egmont.
Yeah, that and doing the starving children. She was a busy girl back then. We had a new editor come aboard, and she looked at it and said, she called me up one day, this new editor, and said, well, I like it, I think it's a good cover. Well, I kind of lost interest, and at that point, it never got made into anything other than this color rough right here.
Which is beautiful, and that is another thing I found in my basement. I was like, oh my god, I have an original Steve Rude watercolor rough. Would you like it back?
You hang on with Delphis, you earned it. We did a lot of experimenting on Nexus. At some point, I wanted to give people more than what the normal regimen of publishers were giving readers, and I had permission and the ability to do. I wanted to do back covers. I wanted to do something extra, and that was my way of giving fans something that Marvel and DC couldn't do because they were so locked down with their rigidity. So a lot of back covers happened this way. A lot of them were actually pretty comical. And in the case of this one right here, you can clearly see what I was going for here.
You guys did a T-shirt of that, isn't it on the?
We actually started making T-shirts of that. We thought it was pretty funny. So yeah, if the image seemed to work as something that might work on a T-shirt, we printed it up. Now there's a lot of you don't know about the benefits that comes from being a comic book artist or an editor. We travel the world. We meet all sorts of people, and we meet all sorts of girls, kind of like the line in the rock song. Well, one of the fringe benefits here are bumping into an occasional Playboy playmate. This young lady here was Miss March 1990 something. Her name was Susie Owens, and she got to be a mascot as a comic book character for Golden Apple Comic Books in LA. People knew I loved the blondes, so they immediately called me up. This is, of course, before I mentioned that. And I raced down to meet Susie, and we did some poolside drawings in charcoal that were a lot of fun. It was life drawing, something I'm used to doing a lot of. Now you notice this is now the 90s here. This is not the 80s anymore, and I'm still trying to sport that look because I didn't want it to go away. What kind of hair did you have back in the 90s, Delphis?
Longer. I had big red hair. Yes, it was various different shades of bright red. I went for the candy colors, and it was just whoosh. You can see pictures of me in the 90s in Jackie Estrada's book, Comic Book People 2, if you really want to. I think there's only a couple of color ones, but...
Yeah, for Anina, you definitely need to go over cost and put the color in, because otherwise it's not red. Got a chance to meet one of my biggest fans. There's a moment I didn't want to forget right there. So, for your benefit, that's included in the slideshow here. I never made it to any of the Midsummer Night Dream parties, but I came close. This was the beginning of the Dark Horse run, the first official Dark Horse run. This was, comic books were changing, as everything does in time. Now, most of us don't know how they're going to change. We just know they do. Because if you look at the last 4 decades, you see how many changes have come in to the field. Most people my age don't even read comic books anymore because we just don't have an affinity for them. We can't identify with some of the things that go on in them and the way things are colored now. To me, it kind of smothers the black line work. They're hard to read. If you hold them up from a distance, you can't even tell what the heck is going on. Never being guilty of such nonsense, I always had made sure my covers read very clearly. But at this point, we had to go black and white. The interiors were black and white, so it was kind of like a poignant, poetic moment where we began in black and white, and we were going to go out in black and white. Dark Horse just couldn't afford color anymore.
Man, it took a lot of the stress away, though. The coloring was a very stressful process for both of us.
And this was a part of a 4-issue mini-series. And this was the last book Dark Horse published before I started self-publishing in 1997. Or was it later than that? I think it was later than that. I think this came out in 97. And this was the very last issue that we published right here.
And at this point, I was actually no longer on staff at Dark Horse, because I worked there in the early 90s, and then I left, and then I went back. And when I came back, Michael Urey, who I think had been your editor in the meantime, handed me a box of files for Nexus, and there were still files that had my old Post-it notes and stuff in them. So I worked on it several different times with gaps in between, and then for a while I was working with you guys freelance after I was let go from Dark Horse.
Yeah, well, he could have at least given you a watch and a box of chocolates to go along with that box.
Steve, how many copies of that one did you end up making? Like 20,000, 10,000, 5,000?
That's a good question. Let's ask the editor here. How?
No idea.
Okay.
I don't remember print run numbers.
Yeah, it's
for
just,
stuff like that.
Marvel right now, they're saying it's hard to do this because they're doing like 20,000 right now, an issue, so it's like, I was wondering, how much were you?
Yeah, 20,000 would have been a lot for then for an independent comic. There were other comics that were there was a big speculation, ridiculous speculation boom that was going on in the 90s that included variant covers, which is another thing that's come back around that I wish we weren't doing and people weren't doing again. And there was also, right now there's a lot more titles coming out than there were then, and so it's within the direct sales market, the actual readership hasn't gotten that much bigger. Most of the readership growth has come in other areas, and so there's more titles competing for the same number of readers. So I think print runs have gone down for a lot of titles.
And speaking of back covers, where I was trying to give the readers a little something extra, this was the last image that people saw on the last Nexus book before I started to self-publish, and so we kind of sent it off with a big question mark, like anyone who's business savvy and continuity sensible will do. It's not over. It'll come back as the one we already know. From there we went on to do something called the Nexus newspaper strip, which a lot of people don't know about, which is a real shame. I had this idea, this grand idea, that instead of we had a chance to go back into publishing Nexus as a comic book, which we did with Dark Horse again. We were once again faced with cost issues. Well, if Dark Horse can't publish Nexus, then who's going to do it? Well, it's going to have to be somebody with a little bit of money, and a lot of going in. And I was elected. Sadly, I was elected. So $170,000 later on, we had put out 7 issues of the Nexus newspaper. Why did I want to do a Nexus newspaper? Well, we had done the comic book, and if you want to keep things alive and kicking, you have to come up with a gimmick sometimes. And one of the gimmicks was to go not forward in time, but to go backwards in time and revive something that was extremely popular for a long time, that entertained millions of Americans and everyone else worldwide. And that was the Sunday Adventure comic strip that nobody was doing. And if they were doing it, it was a watered down version, tries they made of long-time successful strips like Prince Valiant and Terry and the Pirates. Even Greg Hildebrand, who was the artist in that, was ashamed by that. They had given him all these orders on how to do things, and it just wasn't working out. So, but we're continuing. That's exactly, actually, where we're continuing. The Nexus saga is in versions of the newspaper strip, and it's going to be coming out next year. And there's going to be a lot of strips that we didn't get around to publishing the first time when I was doing it under the Rude Dude label. And the Adventures of Nexus will very much continue. So I think we've got a few minutes here. Do we have any questions from the enlightened crowd here?
So it's going to be an actual newspaper?
I wish it was. Based on economics, it's going to be a book that's oversized, that's going to be about this big, like the IDW books.
Ooh.
Okay, and I'm getting cues from
You're
from
doing
Al.
2 books. They're doing 2 books.
Oh, okay, Princess Gina Finelli is now. Thank you, next door.
They're doing 1 book that's oversized, and then they're doing more of a normal size trade paperback.
Yeah, and that's all under the heading of economics, which I'm all for. We have to keep Nexus going, we have a lot more stories to tell. I really miss working with Anina, my old editor, because the one I have now seems to need a lesson in, a refresher course in the ethics of editing. So with that in mind, I just want to, do the normal send-off here, and just thank you guys for coming, okay? So that's the Do Anina show. Now the party can start.
Hey, Janelle, you deserve a hand too.
Yeah.